Hello and welcome to our In Conversation on a practical guide on how to save the world when no one fucking else is. That is a long title. I'm Natasha Kathi Chandra, Artistic Director at Tara Theatre.
And I'm Gavin Joseph, I'll be directing the piece.
And I'm Nicole Latchana and I'm the playwright of the piece.
So you've been working on the Young Company show for around 3 months now. It's coming to, from the recruitment process into the shortlist, into the final show, the company of the final show, which is really exciting. So what have you learned so far in the process of the Tara Young Company?
Wow, what have we learned, Nicole?
Big question.
Such a big question.
Take snacks, protein bars, because we always need a quick snack.
Yes.
Number one, stay.
Breaks.
Breaks.
Adequate amount of breaks. I think the Young Company are just so fiercely intelligent, and it's just been great being around those kind of people. I often find like when you're in a space doing the directing stuff, there's always kind of like a feeling that you need to have all the answers as the director. Usually, yeah, you can resonate with that. But just knowing and having that kind of like comfort knowing that the rest of the group are there and you can access all of those intelligences and not having to know the answer all the time has been like really nice and comforting, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well with the Young Company program, there's something really exciting about how much talent there is out there amongst the newer generation of artists, or these emerging artists as we're labeled and titled, but just sort of this idea of being, even though you're the leader in the space as the director or as the playwright, because this is a devised process as well, but sort of sitting in the comfortability of the fact that they're so intelligent, being led by them as well. How's that been for you, Nicole, as the playwright, kind of taking all this lead from the Young Company and the devising and sort of giving us a script from that?
Yeah, it's been amazing actually. It's been a quite tight turnaround, which I'm not used to. But I think leaning into trust and leaning into trust in the young people, in my collaborators, and also asking for help if I needed it as well. Because I think it's okay to not know all the answers. That's what devising is, like what you said, Gavin. And there were a few moments where I was just so surprised at how like the first option worked. Sometimes when I redraft and I'm on my own, I'm always sort of saying, oh, it can't be that one because that's the first one, I've got to redraft it. But the energy and the talent in the room and the Young Company, they're just so, the characters they brought into the room were so rich, complex, they were flawed, they were interesting, that it was honestly like alchemy in the room. We would just put a provocation into the room and a scene set up, and the scene that they came up with was just yeah, it was just so, I was like hooked. And so it made the writing process so easy. So it kind of it reconnected me with a kind of younger version of myself, because I've been writing plays for about 7 years now. And at the start I didn't really think about writing it. I just was, okay, I'm going to write a scene. A wants B, something from B wants something from A, and there's conflict. And I just started, so now, well, for the last 4 years I've been overthinking it, but now in the room, there's no time to overthink it. And because
it feels like instincts, right?
Yeah, it's honestly, you're running on instinct. And I think that actually really reconnected me to a sort of a greener playwright of myself, version of myself. So yeah.
How was it for you last year?
So similarly, there's something really interesting about what you said, Nicole, from the perspective of sometimes, especially as a global majority playwright or creator, it feels like you're waiting and waiting and waiting for an opportunity. Because sometimes the more traditional processes take the time, the commission takes its time, the drafts take its time, and then it takes that length of time it does to reach fruition, to reach stage. Whereas in this version, as you pointed out, there's a time restriction or limit in terms of how the program is designed, that it comes together, they rehearse or devise over a couple of weeks, and then it comes to rehearsals, and there's a non-traditional sense of putting the show together and actually getting it up on its feet. And when I ran the Young Company in the first year we did it, although that felt really stressful, this exactly what you kind of hit the head on hit the nail on the head of was, what am I saying? Hit the nail on the head of.
That's a statement.
Is this concept of instinct. Like when you get left to kind of think about something for so long, there are actually absolutely advantages to that. You find the right version of something, the best version of something, but then you also question what is the right version of something and what is the best version of something as well, and who dictates that as well. But when you're in a room devising with like-minded creatives and you go on instinct, maybe that is the best version of the show, and maybe what then comes onto stage is the best version of that show as well. So for me, there's been a really interesting post-reflection of questioning how long or short time frames and periods are when it comes to opportunity for gold majority playwrights, when it comes to opportunity for young people. Like, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of how you put something together? But this, for me, the learning was the trust that you have to have in the room, being led by the talent in the room, which is the fierceness and the talent of so many young people who have all of these ideas, and being in a co-creative space and a collaborative space enables them to, you know, take a provocation and make the most of it in that moment, in that 1.5 hours you have to create it. Which leads me to my next question of why is it important to pay young people for opportunities like this?
I guess traditionally, you know, I don't know if you've had experiences with like young companies or being part of them. Like, I remember being at the Lyric, and you know, it was a beautiful experience, but what am I trying to say? No, did we get paid? No, we didn't get paid. We didn't get paid, and you know, in spite of that, it was still a beautiful experience. But I was always like, oh, there's a lot of time out, and you know, you have to forego quite a lot of things, such as work, and it's kind of tricky situation because you want to make kind of like strides in the industry, but then bills got to be paid.
Yeah.
Bills got to be paid.
I think there's a lot of romanticism painted on this penniless artist sort of brand that a lot of artists get. There's something really exciting about Shakespeare being the penniless artist and creating work, but when there's barriers to opportunities, when you don't have the luxury of living at home or having a trust fund or whatever those things that permit you to be able to even buy property or get on the property ladder, it's so hard to sort of, but then you're building your reputation as an artist. I know when I was an emerging artist, there were all these opportunities that were amazing, absolutely. There's no shade to any of the organizations I got those opportunities at. But when I was thinking about the concept of the young company, I looked back on my own career as a freelancer and looked at the number of sacrifices I made around that and the amount of money that I needed to borrow. And I was privileged enough to be able to borrow that from a parent or someone who could give me that, but realized that a lot of my colleagues who maybe started something with me couldn't come on the journey with me because they couldn't afford to come on the journey with me. And when the pandemic hit, it became even more important that opportunities need to be, like, how much is it an opportunity? How much is it a reputable company that you're gaining a credit on your CV for? And how many opportunities are considered professional if they're not paid as well? There were loads of, so I'd have all of these things that I did for free, but so many of them didn't count as professional credits because I never got paid for them, because they were script in hands, because they were rehearsed readings, because they were scratch nights, and none of that counted for professional credit. So I thought about all of those things when I was conceptualizing the company, and I thought, for something, with my business hat on, for something to be considered professional, it meant that creatives and cast and actors needed to be paid for the opportunity. So that's sort of where it came from. And then of course, money, as artists, we don't think money makes the world go round, but unfortunately we're up against the challenge of money making the world go round. How do we fight the barriers that prevent the talent from lower income families, gold majority artists, working class artists, that really helps them to commit to something and actually gain something valuable so they can find their next job, so they can find their, you know, their next opportunity? How do we keep diversifying the sector in a meaningful way? If they're 18 to 25, they're probably in full-time education, they probably need a job, they probably need to work, they need to do something. So how do we balance the program for them to be able to commit to the project? Because they want to in their heart, but with their own business, their life on, you know, they have to make really tricky choices. So that's where it came from. And I think there's always an incentive to maximize the effort you put into something when you're being paid for something as well. It just makes you feel valuable, held, respected in a whole other level. What do you think, Nick?
No,
in your career as a freelance artist as well?
I mean, I totally agree with that. I think, it shouldn't be a privilege to want to work in the arts. I know that when I was growing up, I just didn't even see it as an option. I just was like, well, that's too risky. Like, I'm going to try and do something safe. But, it's I think it's so important to even out the playing fields, because they're working as well. Like, they're doing a job, so they should be paid for it, right? Just, so, and I don't think I would have got, I mean, I didn't really have much support with my artistic career, let's just say that. So I just ended up getting a job which allowed me to work in between busy periods, and I did that for 10 years. And I stayed in that job. It was just a theatre technician job. And I would just be kind of occasionally skiving off work to finish a script deadline, but that was 10 years of unpaid writing work, right? Where I was just, writing plays, putting on plays at scratch nights and things. And so really that job allowed me to write, but without it, I wouldn't be a writer.
Yeah. And there's such a huge question around sustainable. Is this a sustainable career option when you come from a specific background? And I think as well, the option to become an artist when you're from a specific family or culture, it's always sort of, why would you do that? There's no money in it. Or, are you going to be rich and famous someday? And it's like, there's such the hustle, the side hustle and the jobs. It reminded me of all these things I used to do in between just to be able to pay my bills. But it would be something mad like 80-hour weeks where I'd be doing a Monday to Friday in a school and then doing rehearsals straight after that and then doing an extra job. And, and then there'd be a moment where I'd just be like, what am I doing? What is life? I should probably just give this up and become a teacher full time because I'm really good at that. But then there would be something that happened that I go, I need to write about this. Somebody needs to say something about this. But then there's this huge question around, is it sustainable to become an artist in the, with financial barriers, with all of these things? And when you do side hustles and you have to work, like the number of hours you work to be able to have money to pay for things till that big break comes through and things like that, when you don't have the opportunity to just sit and think of the ideas and draft and redraft, because financially you're cool and you can do that.
Still a question now, isn't it? Whether it is sustainable, even in a position like this where we've got full-time work.
Yeah.
Right. Is it enough?
Yeah, because there's always that debate around what we're doing, how we impact communities and people, but how underfunded the sector is compared to other things, like where people make millions and millions of pounds to do, I'm sure, impactful within their own sectors, but there's always that huge catch-22 around. Then you're right, even in the full-time jobs, even in the secure jobs, so to speak. Yeah, is that enough for the cost of inflation and how, and it's not just us. There's so many people in similar kind of jobs where it serves the people, where it serves artists who are just simply, you have to have the heart and the soul and the commitment to it. And there's always a question around, is this enough? Is this enough?
Yeah.
Which for me it is. I've become quite clear about that. And I always say to my family, I didn't become an artist for the money. That would be great, but I didn't do that. But also, when you're nurturing a younger generation, you don't want to keep telling them you have to do something for nothing. You have to give your heart and soul for nothing. We want to change that. We want to make that better. We want to be that catalyst for change. Pay your young people, pay your emerging artists, pay your emerging playwrights. Make it sustainable for them. Make them not want to give up. Otherwise, you're never going to expand the canon. You're never going to have these talented people in your sector. The sector's going to get stuck. It's going to stagnate. So we've got to keep creating these opportunities.
Do you guys remember your first paid job, like in the arts?
Yeah.
What was it?
I do actually. It was actually 2016, and it was for Carly, actually. Big up Carly. And it wasn't big. It was just some money to put on a reading of one of my plays. But that being paid the first time, that for me was like, wow, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe someone sees me. And then, and obviously highlights the importance of theatre companies, global majority theatre companies, because that was Carly, who make work by South Asian female non-binary playwrights. So it gave me that way in. So it was just so important.
Did you feel like an artist prior to that, or was it the paid job that actually solidified I'm an artist now? Because for me, definitely it was the case where getting paid, I was like, oh, you see me as this thing, so I am this thing now. Before that, it was just like, can I call myself a writer? Can I call myself a director? Can I call myself an actor? But the minute the money came in, I was like, absolutely. It felt like that. Don't know if that's the right thing.
We're just filthy capitalists that were like, no, I'm kidding. We also need to eat food and, pay our bills, and I was just being silly.
No, we need to be penniless artists. That's the fun, right?
We need money.
Live in crappy digs and just do something, for no money. It's part of the penniless artist identity.
Yeah.
Sometimes when my clothes are not ironed and they're crushed, people are like, why are you going into work like that? I'm like, I'm an artist. I'm allowed to look like this.
Great excuse.
But yeah, my first was supposed to be paid for something I did at the Vaults and actually didn't ever get paid. It was meant to be my first, and I won't name names because it was a very long time ago.
Name the names.
What I can say is it was an adaptation of a Romeo and Juliet at the Vaults. I don't know, a few years ago.
Do some stuff there. And
I was meant to be paid a little bit of money, not to direct, but to stage manage, actually, as a stage manager, because I run loads of different things to just be in the rehearsal room. Invoiced them a couple of times, never got paid. So that doesn't count, but my very first job, and I agree with what you were saying, I remember getting the offer and going, and it's a paid job, when I was telling people, like my well-wishers and my supporters. And it was actually assistant directing Pooja Guy at Theatre Royal Stratford East on a piece of new writing called The House of In Between. And that was the first time I felt like, someone is, exactly what you said, Gavin, recognizing my ability, my talent, giving me this opportunity. I'm going to get to learn, assist, a director that I, really look up to, develop work. It's something that I can relate to. There was so many positives, but I do remember getting the offer, the fee being in the offer email, and me going, when I look back at it, it wasn't a lot of money. Back then though, when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, what an amazing chunk of money.
Yeah.
But hey ho, but it was, there was absolutely, like you said, Gavin, that moment of, I am an artist. My journey has begun, even though there was so much work to get there. That was when the journey really felt like it began for me, the recognition. So, a practical guide on how to save the world when no one fucking else is. Love the title.
Congratulations for saying it as well.
Thank you. It's great. I'm getting into the swing of it now. I've been referring to it as a practical guide, ... But actually, the whole thing, that's where the power is, right? Tell us a little bit about the show and what to expect.
Well, just to give you a little insight of the process and how we got to this stage. I think the provocation this year for us was how the climate emergency is disproportionately affecting those from the global south. And from that we had so many conversations and we did so much research. I think it was just a whole weekend where me and you were just phoning each other, FaceTiming, and just going what's the show going to be? And just wrapping our heads around it. And the title came first.
Yeah.
The title came first. We were a title-led piece.
And that was you.
This guy here.
Yeah.
Brains.
Genius.
But I think, there was an interesting conversation that I think sparked it, which Nick spoke to this neuroscientist and, explored, people who view the climate emergency, it can feel like this very nebulous and, abstract and existential thing. So it's very hard to kind of grapple with. But this neuroscientist was commenting and saying, when you give people achievable targets and practical things to do, that's when, change can occur. And so there was something within that were that seems interesting. Then we were looking at, eco-terrorism. I can't remember how that came about, but it did. We spent £120 on a book, which kind of led us down the pathway.
That was that much money.
Signed it off. But that was an interesting book because it detailed a lot of the previous climate activist groups and their methodologies and all that kind of stuff. And from that we kind of led to another provocation of what does a global majority-led activist group look like? Because you look at the other activist groups around there and we found that it was just mainly middle class, mainly white. They didn't really cater for people that look like us. So that's kind of like how the show came about.
And now Nick can tell us a bit more about what the show is.
About what it actually is.
What it
actually is. So I want to say it's very rare for me to agree on a title so early on. But when Gavin suggested this title, I just was so sold by it. I was just like, yeah, it's just going to work around the title. Because it just felt so strong. And it felt like a lot of pressure. And I was like, that's what I need, because we should be under pressure. The climate crisis should feel urgent. Just because we're not seeing climate disasters happen like outside our, front door, doesn't mean they're not happening, right? I really think a sense of urgency is needed, and people only start paying attention, when it happens in the global north, with the wildfires, everyone, lost their. Oh, can I swear? Or can I swear? They lost their shit. They lost their shit.
You mean your play title has?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Everyone lost their shit when Paris Hilton or whatever had to leave her house because there was fires. But it's ridiculous because this has been happening for tens of years, and I think that's the kind of energy that I wanted to cultivate in the room. So it was really interesting. I wanted to have that urgency and talk about that urgency, but also I see it in, with my friends, we're very active, politically active, and we sort of feel ourselves burning out a lot of the time because we get so angry and so upset and, we're trying to do everything. And then I was thinking about how do we sustain that urgency? And I think I'm really passionate about community and building communities where we feel safe. And I'm in different communities that sustain me and refill my pot so I can keep going and kind of learning and fighting systems which are keeping us small. So I think the play is about thinking about how we continue to be activists. Whether we spoke a lot in the room or before the room actually about different types of activism and peaceful protest versus eco-terrorism. And that was a really interesting jumping off point and provocation, and it means for a really dramatic story as well, because if you've got one person wanting this and one person wanting the other thing, then that's conflict, and that's inherently juicy and dramatic. So yeah, I think that's what the play's about. So
come and watch it. Find out for yourself.
Just a really interesting observation around the concept of eco-terrorism, why it's important to platform the global south and voices that are so underrepresented in general across the board for various different topics. I think when Gavin and I, all the way back to thinking about the Young Company and the provocation as well, and what that would have been when we were recruiting, it came from two quite nearby conversations that I had with non-global south identifying people, if that's the right way to phrase that. One was somebody had come to the organization who grew up, I think, in France or Belgium, one of the European countries. And she came with this very, lots of energy, lots of charge around sustainability, recycling, communities in Wandsworth who should be doing more about the climate crisis. So I sort of listened to what that was. And she came to Tara specifically because of our community, because of what we do, who we represent. And there was a lot of what sounded to me like loaded accusatory, certain communities of people are not doing what they need to be doing for the climate crisis. That's how it came across to me. I'm sure she didn't intend for it to come across like that, but that's how it came across to me. And the second conversation that happened slightly a couple of months later was I was in Germany, and I was at a table talking to my friend's friends who I'd never met, very similar, a person who doesn't identify from the global south, was talking about the line of work that she does. And she presented to me very proudly how her cafe recycles their food waste to create paper plates, which is a very original idea. And someone like me who grew up in India, where it was completely normal to sit cross-legged on the floor and eat out of banana leaf plates, it sort of got me thinking that, again, when the voices that dominate the conversation around climate emergency completely misunderstand and sort of present these very bold statements, where there's this really interesting thing that the Western world has developed, they've created the factories, done all the gases, do whatever is damaging the ozone. And quite frankly, this is a very personal opinion, there's a lot of let's turn our heads now to the developing countries and tell them that all of their practices are not sustainable. Even though a lot of that has been left behind colonially from colonization. A lot of the way steam engines and trains and all these things run. And let's not forget how much they were plundered and looted. So when you're developing electric trains and electric this and electric that, you're also catching up with the number of years you've not been allowed to develop as well. You're living in a society, when you talk about poverty in the developing world and the developed world, poverty is a completely different thing. Identifying as working class is a completely different thing, you know. So I've sort of experienced firsthand when we went to Bangladesh to film for Amma, they had these unplanned, unpredicted, severe monsoons that came in. So it is the developing world which are feeling the direct consequences of the climate emergency right now, and because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the cycle of the lack of from colonial rule, from all of this, they don't have the infrastructure. So every time an earthquake hits or a severe summer comes in and there's drought and there's no water, you're also looking at people who live in poverty, who don't, their first thought isn't the climate emergency. Their first thought is, how do I feed my kid today? And that's the challenge I threw back. I also said to that lady, that's not an original idea.
What did she say?
She tried to defend her case, but I didn't want to I wasn't in the mood to have a political conversation on my friend's birthday. Yeah. From the perspective of, let's not spoil the mood, because I can get very passionate and very loud, and then people will think I'm shouting, and
angry brown woman.
And then we get angry brown woman, and I didn't want to get into the complexities of that. But I think there's something really enraging about the fact that there are communities in South Asia, in the global south, who are naturally agricultural and naturally sustainable. In India, we've been using jute bags for centuries. Here, it's trendy. Look at my tote bag, it's made out of cloth. When I went to school, I had a little basket which was made out of jute, which I carried my lunch in. It was just a thing, you know, until, you know, America gets everywhere, and then carrying a fancy zipped bag is a lot more fancier because you're trying to look cool in school. But it was very normal to use metal containers and not to use plastic. It's, you know, it's normal to cook food fresh and, you know, and recycle it or reuse it. Or the curry comes from something that lasts for days as opposed to throwing it away because it dates back. You know, Caribbean food comes from something that needs to be kept for days and days because you don't have, how often do you get to cook fresh food? There are natural inbuilt practices into certain cultures of being sustainable, of being agricultural, of respecting your resources, of using the sunlight, of using the rain, you know, of planning your produce around, you know, around the weather, you know, it's stuff like that. So for me, there was definitely an element of anger. There was definitely an element of, how do we take that narrative back to the cultures that have been doing it for centuries, that have been practicing sustainable ways of living for centuries, and actually modern technology, which is not something, you know, the technology that we were doing centuries ago was modern. It was the sustainable practice of doing something, and it was very modern. It was always in tune and in harmony with the earth. That's what a lot of, you know, traditional cultures are about. So it came from anger. It came from how do we reclaim that narrative? How do we bring it to a group of people who come from the global south, who have direct experiences of these changes? Because like you said, Nicole, you open your door, it's not happening on your doorstep, but in Bangladesh or in Pakistan or in Thailand, an earthquake's happening out of character, tsunamis hitting, the rain's not coming, the sun's gone above 40 degrees now. It's such a huge, like, that's the part of the world that's feeling the impact more than anything. But living in Western society, there is a narrative that dominates it, that hides it a lot. So
interesting, because that was one of the significant points that was made at like the Seedlings Festival.
Yeah.
Of how, you know, even just the word sustainable has been repackaged for like Western audiences. And I think it was Zayn, who's from the Young Company, who mentioned that, you know, indigenous communities have been living like this.
Yeah.
And then for you to then try educate us just feels mad orientalist.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the thing that I have the biggest gripe with Western way of approaching climate emergency. It feels very orientalist. Do you know what I mean? They're like, they tell us how to feel, they repackage it, they study it, the culture, and be like, hey, this is how it really should be. This is how your practices are. I'm like, shut up.
Yeah.
You're wrong.
But it definitely feeds into that point you're making, Nicole, about there is a certain privilege involved in being able to action the climate emergency. Like it's from where you come from, how much time. It's like being an artist. Like, there are certain barriers in place that prevent you from, you know, actively engaging in the climate emergency, because how much time can you spend in a protest? Will you be seen? Will you be heard if you look a certain way coming into a room?
Yeah.
There's so much synergy in the conversations we have around being an artist of a certain identity as well. And yeah, the provocation for me is definitely rage and anger and activism and reclaiming something that we've been doing, as Zayn pointed out, for years and years. Yeah. This is something you're taking from us now and saying, we've got these ideas. And it's like, we've literally been doing this, but you gave us plastic. Yeah. Which I'm like, you know.
So funny you mentioned like rage and anger, because that's something that you kind of like channeled in on. With the piece. It's like, you said something really, really interesting. It's like global majority artists and just we don't really have a space to showcase anger a lot.
Yeah.
But when we do, it's vilified and demonized to such a degree where it's like, we just have this pent up, this pent up like vent that's just pent up anger that just doesn't allow, you have no release.
Yeah.
And then in the show, you were just like, what would it look like? What would it look like for, you know, us to kind of like express that?
Yeah.
Something quite interesting I thought you touched upon.
So speaking of expressing the anger, expressing the rage, can theatre actually change anything?
No. The end. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know what I mean? I think, again, one of our young company members kind of like put it way more succinctly. She was like, the arts are an emotive thing, you know. When you hear these facts and these figures and they're harrowing, but it can be quite difficult to connect because they're just numbers. But the minute you put a family in front of us, and we get to connect and we get to understand it, it becomes way more personable and relatable, and you're going to get influenced and potentially do more and action it. So art for me is that, you know, storytelling is our best currency, I think. And so when someone gives us a story that reflects, you know, a wider, you know, issue, that's when we're like, okay, I can galvanize around this. I don't know what you feel.
Yeah, I feel like climate change, as you say, it feels very nebulous and sort of over there. And I think making it about people and about watching people in a space just brings it down to with people talking in a space. And I think there's a kind of narrative about what it means to be like a perfect activist or what an activist looks like, when actually I feel like we all have agency. We have agency in where we choose to shop. We have agency about in where we decide to exist. Like, we have agency. It's everything can be political. You know, we see them reflected in us, and us reflected
100%.
in them. And I think what I love about theatre and story is that people aren't perfect, they're flawed. And I think sometimes we can be so hard on ourselves, and we think that we're not doing enough, or we don't know enough, so we're not going to try. But I think seeing other people go through these things and see them flawed and make mistakes and try, I think that is powerful. So that's why I think story is powerful. One of the ways, one of the many ways.
I agree with everything you're saying. It's part of the reason I became an artist. When I look back on being in school, you know, those very vulnerable moments where you want to call something out, you want to challenge something, you disagree with something, or someone's bullying you and picking on you for being a little bit different, and you just want that release, that space to kind of put something out. It's why I became an artist. It's why I started to sort of gain control of my own narrative and what I wanted to do. And if I hadn't become an artist, I probably would have become a teacher, because that's another way you can connect with people. You have that opportunity to have conversations with young people or students or people who are shaping the future, people who will take your place generationally and things like that. It's exactly what you said, Nicole. It's that way to connect with people, to talk to young people who are going to shape the future. What world are you leaving behind? It's all of those things which were really important. Theatre has that power. You know, I could have gone into film, screen. Maybe I will at some point. You know,
All right.
But right now, I think when I did theatre for the first time, I absolutely fell in love with that connection that you don't have, which is being mediated by a camera or being mediated in an editing suite. There's someone sitting right there, whether it's a family member, whether it's a young family, whether it's somebody who doesn't agree with you, who comes in because they're like, I don't agree with how to change the world, there's nothing wrong with the world, I don't need a practical guide, who there's a moment there where they go, actually, this is also something that I can do. I can think differently. I can look at a group of young gold majority people and not make an assumption of who they are and what they're about and their feelings and how they feel about something. That's why it's so important to create theatre, to host this talent, to grow the talent and to showcase it to people. Maybe even if in a sea of 1,000 people come to see the show, even if one person changes something about how they do something or what they think, for me, that is the impact. Not just the people sharing the work, but the people who come to see something. One conversation can change anything. The next time they're having a Christmas dinner, they'll say, actually, that really awkward conversation I was having last year, I've changed my mind about it because I saw this piece of work. It came from the heart, it came from people. And that is so important to me. And I think theatre absolutely has that power and can change that, because it did it for me. So it's going to do it for other people.
Wow, that was beautiful.
Thanks. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. To my Tara Talk. Tara TED Talk.
Tara TED Talk.
Tara TED Talk. This is just the start of the conversation. A practical guide on how to save the world when no one fucking else is coming to stage soon, opening on the 15th of April, running to the 19th of April. It's really exciting. It's got a brilliant team, a talented group of young people putting this show together. Tickets are selling fast, so don't miss out. This is your chance to come to Tara Theatre and join the conversation and maybe save the world. Or at least try. Or at least get a practical guide on how to do it.